Hi, I'm Karen Taylor. I'm a 55-year-old woman that I was born and raised here in Seattle, Washington at the University of Washington Hospital in 1964. I am a survivor of the school to prison pipeline. At age 15, I entered into the school to prison pipeline, and I didn't get out of Purdy Treatment Center for Women until I was 21. And I've been out 16 years. I turned my life around. I went to Career Bridge, which was a program from Urban League that was birthed by the men in the Black Prisoners Caucus, the men in prison. And it was a place where I finally felt relief. I finally felt accepted, and I felt that my story and the things that happened to me in my life mattered. They nurtured me. They surrounded me with a network of people. And I started doing work with EPIC, Ending the Prison Industrial Complex. I'm a member of the People's Institute Northwest and Beyond, an anti-racist organizer in my community. I'm a proud member of the Village of Hope, and I am one of the executive directors alongside Lamont Green for the Lived Experience Coalition, or LEC as we call it, here in Seattle, Washington. The reason I joined the LEC was because my story matters. And I wanted to empower people, to value people, and to help them with leadership development and maintaining and gaining their power back. Because hope's been lost for a lot of these people that are homeless and out on the streets. They lost hope. They believe that nobody cares about them and that they don't matter. So what my sole reason was to give them power back, because somebody cared about me and somebody prayed for me, and that's how I was able to make it out of the stereotypical view that I believe society had about me because of my record.
Hi, my name is D'Artagnan Calaman, and I am the Executive Director for Building Changes. Thank you, Karen, for sharing your talent with us. We are pleased to partner with Karen through the Lived Experience Coalition, a group that Building Changes is proud to support, because in order to solve homelessness, we must listen to those directly impacted by homelessness. While we are meeting virtually, I want to respectfully acknowledge the Coast Salish peoples whose land I am on today and whose ancestors and descendants have stewarded this land for generations. As a Seattle-based organization, we acknowledge that Seattle was a relocation destination city for American Indian and Alaska Native during the termination era, which contributed to loss of access to traditional cultural supports, economic hardship, and social disenfranchisement. Please take a moment to recognize the land that you are occupying by visiting the link displayed on the screen. Thank you. And welcome to our Building Changes virtual fundraiser. Building Changes occupies a unique space in the fight against homelessness. We are one of the few organizations in Washington that takes a systems-level approach to solving homelessness. I know how important this is because I personally experienced homelessness as a child. I remember as a student how difficult it was to focus on school when I was thinking about where my family and I were going to stay that night. I cannot even begin to imagine the additional hardships that students and families are experiencing right now during this COVID-19 crisis. One thing that makes Building Changes unique and drew me to this role is our three-pronged approach to fighting homelessness. The first prong is innovation. We develop and field test various innovative strategies to reduce and prevent homelessness. The second prong is evaluation. We conduct data-driven research to determine which of those field-tested strategies work best, in what kind of communities, and for whom. The third and final prong is advocacy. We push to advance the best of the innovative, data-driven strategies that we have tested and evaluated. We do all this to ensure that communities are investing in the best strategies possible to solve homelessness. During this event, you are going to hear about how we pivoted our work during COVID-19 to address the most pressing needs of students experiencing homelessness and their families. You will come away with a real appreciation for why you and your financial support are needed to help Building Changes continue to do this important work. Together, we can solve homelessness. Before I pass it over to my colleagues, I want to thank the elected officials and their offices in attendance, along with our amazing sponsors who helped to make this event possible. Shout out to Washington Trust Bank, Amazon, Kaiser Permanente, Trutina Financial, and Lou and Tara Lanthier for your incredible support. Okay, now I'm pleased to introduce my colleague, Emily Meltzer, who will lead us through an activity to get us thinking specifically about student homelessness in Washington State.
Thank you, D'Artagnan. I'm Emily Meltzer, Development Director at Building Changes. Student homelessness is an issue across Washington State that often goes unseen, even though it directly impacts more than 40,000 students and their families. One of the many ways Building Changes brings attention and urgency to this issue is by releasing our annual analysis of school-based data collected each year by the State Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction. Our analysis identifies characteristics and trends in student homelessness, and our findings are groundbreaking because the data has never before been analyzed this deeply or presented this clearly. Our analysis has revealed huge disparities in the academic outcomes that exist between students experiencing homelessness and their housed peers. The outcomes we see are in areas like math proficiency, English language arts proficiency, and on-time graduation. To familiarize you with some of the data, we're going to have a pop quiz. Get ready. Okay, question number 1. What percentage of students experiencing homelessness are students of color? A, 30%, B, 40%, or C, 60%? If you guess C, that is the correct answer. Actually, it's even higher than that at 62%. Since 2015, Black, Pacific Islander, and American Indian students have experienced the largest increases in student homelessness rates. And 1 out of every 11 Black students in K-12 schools across the state of Washington experiences homelessness during any given school year. Let me repeat that so it sinks in. 1 out of every 11 Black students experiences homelessness during any given school year. That is unconscionable. Racism and other systemic failures have led to these gross inequities. Building Changes is dedicated to addressing these and other racial inequities by tailoring strategies and advancing solutions to help those who are most disproportionately impacted by homelessness, students of color and their families. Okay, on to question number 2. What types of communities have the highest rates of student homelessness on a per capita basis? A, urban, B, suburban, or C, rural? Again, the answer is C, rural. Surprised? You shouldn't be, because student homelessness is a statewide issue. In rural communities, 4.8% of all students per capita experience homelessness during a given year. While it is true that more than 40% of all students experiencing homelessness in Washington State attend schools in urban districts, the relative proportion of students who are experiencing homelessness is highest in rural areas. Okay, on to the third and final question. Should you have reason to be hopeful? Yes or no? The answer, of course, is yes. By advancing racially equitable, research-informed solutions to student homelessness, we can make progress, and we are making progress. High school graduation rates have gone up for students experiencing homelessness since 2015, which is around the same time that Building Changes began focusing on student homelessness. Is the gap in graduation rates between students experiencing homelessness and house students still too high? You bet it is. House students graduate on time at a rate of 83%, compared to 56% for students experiencing homelessness, a gap of 27%. Building Changes is hopeful, and you should be too, that we can continue to narrow that gap. And someday soon, we can work together to make that gap disappear altogether. I hope you all aced the quiz, but if you didn't, hopefully you took away some new knowledge about this very important and under-discussed issue. We at Building Changes are firm believers that by focusing on student homelessness and focusing on them and their families, we can help prevent generational cycles of homelessness from happening down the line. I'm now going to bring in my colleagues, Sammy Iverson and Katara Jordan, who focus on the issue of student homelessness for Building Changes. Thank you for joining me, Sammy and Katara. Let's start with a question for both of you to weigh in on. Why does Building Changes place such a strong emphasis on student homelessness?
So our work at Building Changes has focused on helping different systems work together to better address family and youth homelessness. We have a very long history of testing and evaluating strategies to really improve the homeless response system. And I think what we've learned through this experience is that you have to go beyond just trying to improve the traditional homeless system, but you have to work to improve every system that serves families and young people experiencing homelessness. And we really believe that schools play an important role in that work. So it makes perfect sense for Building Changes to focus on the 40,000 plus students experiencing homelessness in our state, because many of these students are experiencing housing instability with their families, and about half of these students are in grade 5 or younger. But I also want to note, despite that kind of population breakdown, that a significant number of this population are also unaccompanied homeless youth who are not in the custody of a parent or guardian, and those youth tend to be older. Now that said, we know that children, youth, and families affected by housing crises are not being adequately served by the education, housing, and health systems due to insufficient resources, lack of capacity and leadership buy-in to really address student homelessness and the opportunity gap it creates, especially for students of color. So by centering our work on student homelessness, it allows Building Changes to widen our scope and approach the problem of homelessness differently through the intersection of education, housing, and health. And this approach allows us to identify and understand how the broad range of housing crises impacts children, youth, and families across different systems.
Thanks, Katara. Is there a racial equity component to this work?
Absolutely. So we know that almost 2/3 of students experiencing homelessness are students of color, even though they make up less than half of all K-12 public students. By addressing student homelessness, Building Changes is directly impacting racial inequities and homelessness in education by intentionally targeting resources to students of color and their families. Because we approach our work through the interdisciplinary lens of research and evaluation, technical assistance, policy and strategic communications, this framework allows us to collaborate with schools and community-based homeless service and health providers to develop and test racially equitable strategies to see if they work for students of color experiencing homelessness and their families. This is especially important during the pandemic, to be approaching our work with an race equity lens, since COVID-19 is having a large disproportionate impact on people of color.
I couldn't agree with you more, Katara. And something that is really important to understand is that while it may seem intuitive for different sectors to work together when they're serving the same populations of people, in this case, students experiencing homelessness, that just doesn't happen. Systems speak different languages, they follow different policies, and the work becomes siloed. This is where Building Changes hopes to bring systems together, to inspire cross-sector collaboration, learn what unique relationships and resources exist within individual communities, and really encourage sharing the work, ultimately building an infrastructure that not only acknowledges the different sectors are serving the same households, but does this work together and in alignment with one another. The end goal being to produce responsive, efficient, and relevant support for our most vulnerable students and families. So, what does this work even look like? An example and a part of my role is to co-facilitate the School Housing Network with my colleague Marette. School Housing Network is a statewide peer learning group we created for school support staff and housing providers to share student homeless strategies that were working well locally, and then also build a space to share resources and learn from one another. This group meets monthly and has been a growing partnership community for the last 4 years. But as we saw COVID come through, we increased the frequency of our School Housing Network from monthly to every other week. We adapted our meetings to focus on how providers were faring amidst the pandemic, what supports were needed, and tried to celebrate really anything that was going well at that time. Our attendance increased during that time as well. And we heard these conversations were comforting for participants and that it was just helpful to have a space during a challenging time to connect with others who are going through similar struggles.
Okay, on to the next question. What are some of the unique challenges that students experiencing homelessness face?
So I'll start with what I see as one of the largest and particularly most frustrating systemic challenges meeting the needs of students experiencing homelessness. A definitional misalignment exists, and it's between the U.S. Department of Education and the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, also known as HUD. So to be eligible for housing services in our communities across the state, households must meet the criteria for literally homeless as defined by HUD. In short, this means living in a car, living outside, living in a shelter, somewhere not meant for human habitation. Maybe you're a household that's actively fleeing domestic violence. The other side, from the perspective of the Department of Education, be eligible for what is known as McKinney-Vento programs, which is a federal mandate. Any individual who lacks a fixed, regular, or adequate nighttime residence qualify as eligible for homelessness services. This includes students who are couch surfing, coupled up with other families due to financial or economic hardship, just to name a few. And if we think about the 40,000 plus students in Washington experiencing homelessness, it's extremely important to know that nearly 75% of these students are doubled up. So if you're following, this is highly problematic. Because what it means is that 75% of that 40,000 plus student population is not eligible to receive housing services through regular established pathways that HUD has laid out for us. Also, Building Changes has done some research that shows students experiencing homelessness who are living doubled up have similarly poor academic outcomes to students who are living unsheltered. We also know that 6 out of 10 students experiencing homelessness are students of color. So if we care about academic achievement and equity, serving these students is imperative. The way our systems are set up just doesn't address their needs. So just to, again, make this extra clear, why does this misalignment even matter? And it's basically because even though doubled up students are considered homeless under the Education Department definition, and their families do not qualify for housing resources available through HUD. Again, most common way to access those resources is through that entity. So the only way to get those students and their families the homeless services they need is through programs specifically targeted toward addressing student homelessness. These kinds of programs are rare, and these are the programs that we at Building Changes are advocating for. We understand how the misalignment stunts the ability for students experiencing homelessness not only to access needed housing resources, to be able to thrive academically. So that's one unique challenge that's really hard to see unless you're working directly with students experiencing homelessness. From my past work within a district, it was very clear that students with high mobility, moving from place to place, or lacking that fixed, regular, adequate nighttime residence were not able to fully engage academically as their house peers were. I recall hearing that every time a student moved, they could lose up to 4 to 6 months of academic progress. I should also add that so many of these challenges that students experiencing homelessness face have been compounded and magnified during COVID-19.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Sammy, for that example. Katara, you are out there directly advocating for students experiencing homelessness in Olympia and across the entire state. Can you talk a little bit about how that's going and what successes we've had?
Absolutely. So our advocacy starts with researching existing data and really trying to understand the challenges that are happening on the ground. So we often talk with homeless liaisons, students, and their families who are, facing different crises within the housing, education, and health systems. For example, our analysis of OSPI student homelessness data really helped the legislators understand the academic and housing challenges that these students face and why the education system uses such an inclusive definition of homelessness, which is what Sammy touched on earlier. When it comes to, academic outcomes, whether you are literally on the streets, couch surfing, living in an overcrowded space, or residing in a shelter, all of these unstable housing situations has an impact on the student's ability to learn. So, what's been really great about kind of the advocacy work that we've been doing is that it's opened the door for us to also partner with state agencies and school districts to really work together to, develop innovative strategies so that schools and their communities are supported in being able to provide students experiencing homelessness with every opportunity possible to succeed. And I think, one of the greatest successes we've had in that regard is supporting advocacy on the Homeless Student Stability Program. And, as Sammy really highlighted, we need programs that are specifically targeted to this population. But, the Homeless Student Stability Program, which was created in 2016, and we call HSSP for short, what it does is that it gives students experiencing homelessness additional supports and services above and beyond what is required by federal law. It is also regarded across the country as a model on how states can really support the needs of their students and families who are experiencing homelessness. But based on what we've learned just since the program's creation, we have successfully advocated for improvements such as, a better focus on racial equity, geographic diversity, really increased training capacity across the state for homeless liaisons, and really trying to incentivize schools and community providers to partner and work together in addressing the needs of students and families within their local school districts. And what's really great about that is it really helps those communities really tailor their solutions based on what that community needs to address what they're seeing, their students and families, or the barriers that the students and families in their districts are facing. And, we want communities to develop tailored responses, that are going to work to meet their needs. So that's our advocacy in a nutshell.
Well, and full disclosure, before I came to work here at Building Changes, I worked for Tacoma School District as a McKinney Vento liaison, was funded by HSSP. So I'm a fan. And I'm also part of the team at Building Changes that works directly with HSSP communities. What we learned is that school closures and social distancing protocols created a lot of challenges in getting school districts and local nonprofits to work closely together. But I'm certain still the cross-sector relationships being built now will pay off in the future. We have a really unique opportunity to think about how partnership be creatively meeting the needs of students and families because of what we learned through the pandemic. An example of this would be schools were definitely a hub of resources for many, many students and families. And losing that connectivity has had huge impacts on their ability to access resources. This could maybe be a time that we really leverage partnership of community providers to help understand where families are, what their needs are, and to work together. Do still miss, and I really did love working directly with students and families, but that particular job with the district was hard because it was so clear to me that students and families' needs were not being met, and it didn't have to do with anything but systemic barriers and the lack of alignment across sectors. What I love about working for Building Changes is that I'm able to work with school housing providers across the state. I get to focus on vital partnerships and work on solutions to remove those barriers that adversely impact students experiencing homelessness and their families. The solutions may be setting up structures for better coordination between the education sector and the homeless system, or they may be developing targeted, equitable solutions that aim to end systemic racism. Our audience today comes away from this chat just one thing. I hope it's that you understand unique needs of students experiencing homelessness and Building Changes' commitment to addressing the challenges associated with student homelessness. And we're 100% focused on advancing those solutions.
Thank you, and really well said. This seems like a good place for us to wrap up, and thank you, Sammy and Katara, for sharing more about Building Change's work to advance solutions to student homelessness. Let's now bring it back to D'Artagnan for another interactive activity.
Thank you, Katara, Sammy, and Emily, for the informative discussion. Now I'm going to walk you through a short exercise to help you imagine the gravity of the situation facing students experiencing homelessness at this moment. Feel free to close your eyes, write things down, whatever will help you to process. Let's begin. Imagine you are a student experiencing homelessness in the year 2020. Schools are still closed because of COVID, and you have to log into a computer to take classes. Your school has provided you with a tablet, but where are you going to plug it in? You call a couple friends, but their parents say you can't come over because of the pandemic. Libraries are closed, so you walk to a nearby park to try to access public Wi-Fi from there. But your tablet reads no internet connection and the battery is about to die. How are you supposed to learn? Now imagine having to do distant learning while you and your family are staying at a local homeless shelter. The shelter has set aside a room for students taking remote classes, but it's really loud in there. It's near impossible to hear your teacher through the computer, and the internet is lagging because so many people are using it. It's almost impossible to focus. Besides, the only thing you've been able to focus on lately is not getting sick because the shelter is crowded and it is hard to maintain social distance. Due to all the distractions, you also totally miss what your teacher just said about how to do the current assignment at hand. So you struggle through the rest of the class. Students experiencing homelessness are doing their absolute best to succeed in school. They face a variety of obstacles, and as a result, they have to fight for the right to an education. Systems are supposed to provide them safety nets, but some of those safety nets have collapsed entirely in the face of COVID-19. When the mandate came down last spring to close the schools, Building Changes immediately recognized the disproportionate impacts that COVID-19 would have on students experiencing homelessness. So we shifted into overdrive and took action. I'd now like to turn it over to some of the partners in our COVID-19 response to assist students experiencing homelessness and their families. They will talk about what we've been able to accomplish together in our communities.
You know, as soon as Washington schools announced that they were going to close in response to COVID-19, we knew we needed to act quickly.
When you add the instability of homelessness or foster care into the mix of trying to navigate this virtual education world, we are concerned about our students falling kind of further and further behind.
We all really recognized that there was going to be a real need for organizations throughout our state to be able to access dollars to support people either who were losing their jobs because of COVID or themselves got COVID or were scared to live in congregate shelters because of COVID and all of the things that were happening.
You know, we partnered with Building Changes to launch the COVID-19 Response Fund because they have a proven record. And also because they have strong relationships across the state with nonprofits and schools that we knew would ensure that the funds would meet immediate needs. Now, from the start, Building Changes was very committed to a streamlined process so that the grantees could really focus on getting students and their families what they needed.
We wanted to get the dollars into the hands of those most impacted and furthest away from services and opportunity, which for the most part are our Black African American folks experiencing homelessness and housing instability, and Native American Alaska Native folks experiencing homelessness and housing instability. And other people of color, we very quickly learned about the Latinx populations and Hispanic populations that were overrepresented in COVID.
We were able to very quickly partner on a survey out to our McKinney-Vento and foster care liaisons in school districts and get a very quick picture, like within a week or 10 days, of what needs the various school districts were seeing.
We needed to talk to people most impacted. And that's why it was super important to go to the voices of young people who've experienced homelessness in the past or are currently experiencing homelessness. So we got together a focus group and really asked them, Basically, we're like, if our focus is on equity and we want to focus on Black, African Americans, Latinx, LGBTQ, and other folks, and get these dollars out into those people's hands, how should we do that? What should we be looking for? And that group of young people really informed the criteria that made up the algorithm that we now use to make these funding decisions.
They had a criteria that they sent out, and we just went over it, and they were asking for like our feedback based on the criteria and like what any adjustments and like what we were seeing from each of our sides about like populations and like geographically and like how the money should be funded, like if it should be, you know, weighted equally, or if, you know, certain populations or, you know, certain situations like of those experiencing homelessness should receive different amounts of money, or like the different grants, or if, you know, it should be based on the city or the rural areas. So like, yeah, it's really important because it just shows like, you know, not only are the organizations like, you know, meaning what they say, but like we're getting the help that we need.
Funding is so unusually wonderful because of the flexibility of the funding and the way in which we could utilize it. It is really a breath of fresh air to not feel encumbered. Being able to offer the supports that Building Changes has given us, we've been able to have, you know, tents for both sun and rain, and been able to hand out everything that people need, and been able to pay the people to be there at times when we usually wouldn't be open in the summer.
The ACT program has helped youth who are in school right now by simply providing laptops or doing cash transfers. We actually helped with a lot of health and wellness and basic needs. So tons of groceries, tons of food, even wellness things, you know, eyeglasses, medicine, just things to keep people's basic needs met.
I think really that sort of data-driven, research-based evidence, and then multiplied by advocacy, has been such an incredible gift in our shared work together. I can't speak highly enough of Daniel Zavala and Katara Jordan. You know, I get to work with them multiple times a week on a variety of strategies and settings and work related to our Project Education Impact Work Group, work related to advocating for our student needs in terms of COVID response. You know, they are among, you know, our most, you know, treasured and active colleagues, and we would not be where we are in terms of addressing the needs of kids in foster care if we had not partnered with Building Changes.
Thank you to all the partners for being part of that video. One reason Building Changes can be successful in our work is because of the passion and support of our partners. Work of Building Changes never ends. This school year, we are continuing to address the impacts of COVID-19 on students experiencing homelessness and their families. We are making sure their basic needs are met. We are helping them acclimate to distant learning. And we are helping those at risk of losing housing be able to stay housed. Building Changes is not only helping students and families address their immediate needs related to COVID-19, but we are also working on a variety of initiatives that will help them when this pandemic is over. We are building a movement among school districts and communities to reach a goal to where students experiencing homelessness have the same rates of academic success as their house peers. We are working on tools and strategies that can be adopted by schools across the state to improve outcomes. Today, fewer than 6 in every 10 students experiencing homelessness graduate high school on time. We envision a time in the not too distant future where that rate increases to 9 out of every 10. We can achieve that goal and many others with your help. With that, I want to introduce Roger Zweed, Board Chair of Building Changes.
So I want to start by thanking D'Artagnan and the entire Building Changes staff and our guests on today's program and all of you that have stuck with us through this terrific presentation. You know, listening to those imagined scenarios, it's so easy to feel the anxiety, the frustration, and the fear that these kids must experience every day. But I'm also proud to be associated with an organization that's working hard to make things better for them. Building Changes advocates day in and day out to ensure that these young people are prioritized as part of our state's pandemic response and beyond. Because those scenarios we heard about earlier are not only heartbreaking, but they're simply unacceptable. All students deserve the chance to graduate and to thrive in a safe and stable home. And Building Changes is bringing data-informed solutions rooted in racial equity to Olympia and across the state to spark much-needed change. I joined the board of Building Changes because I'm compelled by the need to address our homelessness crisis. And I want to be helping an organization that is working to change the entire system. I want to support a group that tests new approaches, measures their impact, and advocates with the government for adopting the ones that work statewide. And I want to be part of an organization that acknowledges that racism is deeply connected to our homelessness problem, not just here in Washington State, but across the country. Building Changes knows what needs to be done to help families and students experiencing homelessness. It knows that as eviction moratoriums are lifted, more families and students impacted by COVID-19 will find themselves without a home. And it has the respect and the relationships to get the right people in the room or on a Zoom call to affect change and improve the systems that serve these people. But all of this work takes money, which is why I am here today to ask you to join me in making a personally significant gift to support Building Changes. A generous group of supporters has created a matching fund, which will double any new donation made today as part of this program, as well as doubling any increases in donations from previous donors. So I ask that you give as generously as you can and help us access the full extent of the matching funds available to us. I want to thank you for your time. We will be emailing a link to this broadcast to all of you today. And we ask that you share that with your friends and family and ask them to help us spread the word about the need to help homeless students access stable housing in Washington State. Enjoy the rest of your day.